So as I've said in previous lessons, screen printing does have its limitations, but you can even use these to your advantage to create different and original effects. So I'm going to explain how to make the most out of these disadvantages. As we've seen, using the mesh allows the paint to go through the gaps between the threads, reach the fabric, and stamp. This allows the ink that goes through the gaps to reach the fabric, although not evenly. It goes through very small points, almost unnoticeable when it's a large patch of colour, but it can be seen on the borders. If you look closely, it's like small pixels. This depends on the weight of the mesh on our screen. There are meshes with different weights. The heavier it is, the smaller the gap between the threads and the more details you can add, as the points are smaller. A heavier net is okay for printing sheets, but not really if we're printing t-shirts. Then the ideal weight of the screen's fabric would be 43 threads. The weight of the mesh also affects the minimum printing size. As I said before, they're like small pixels, so we can't design below this measurement. If the lines of our drawing are too fine, there might be cuts, or the ink might not get distributed properly. In this image, you can see how the different thicknesses work on a cotton fabric on the 43 thread screen. So avoid using sizes under 1 point with a 43 thread screen. Bear in mind that the heavier the screen, the sooner the paint will get stuck, and then we'll have to recover it and apply the emulsion again. So I mentioned the paint getting blocked up. At the beginning, this can happen to us a few times. Here you can see a screen that's blocked in the area where the paint is applied. This happened while making a few tote bags on a hot day. I should have used a retarder in the paint, but I didn't, and although it could have been useless, it wasn't, and I'll explain why. Knowing that this was one of my first projects in screen printing, I imagined this could happen, so I decided to make a design with vintage textures, something that wasn't perfect, so that if a few threads were blocked, it wouldn't really matter. I'm going to explain how to make vintage textures in Photoshop. Paste your vector design into Photoshop. Remember, you need to select CMYK Color Mode. Create a mask on the vectors layer. Now, with a textured brush in black, paint, but just clicking, not dragging. Apply the texture gradually like this. You can change brush, size, or create a new one for this purpose. If you think you've gone overboard and there's too much noise, you just need to change the fill color to white and rectify whatever you need. Now, with a soft brush, go over the border of the design to emulate a print from an old machine that doesn't distribute the ink properly. You need to do this all over the design, just as I have in this bit. When you've finished adding texture, double-click on the vector layer, and in Color Overlay, choose a black tone. Next, convert the image to a grayscale, to then convert it to a bitmap. Then you can see how the design will look on your screen. If you want to do a really clean design with really pronounced lines, you can do, like this design here. But you need to be careful when adding the emulsion and insulating the screen to control the points that might get blocked with emulsion or paint. The number of colours we print on our t-shirt depends on the press we have and how many stations it has. The press has various stations where the fabric, or whatever you're going to print, is placed. This way you can work quicker. Each arm corresponds with the number of colours we can use. If the press only has one arm, one station like this one, then you can only print in one colour and do one at a time. Here you see a press with 4 stations that allows us to print up to 4 different colours. When we design for silkscreen printing, it's good to have this in mind for 2 reasons. The first is there aren't usually presses with more than 8 stations, and most only have 4. So it's important we don't go over on the colour when designing for our t-shirt, as we'll probably have to modify it later. The second reason is that with each colour, the t-shirt becomes more expensive, whether you order the print or you do it yourself in your workshop. So you always need to consider the number of colours present in your design. As you probably guessed, because we can only print solid colours, it's pretty much impossible to create gradients like this one in silkscreen printing. Shadows, after all, are gradients, so if you want them to look like this, it's best to avoid them altogether. If you want a gradient in silkscreen printing, you need to use halftones of colour. This is really easy to achieve in Illustrator, and I'll explain how. In this design, I've only done the outline, and we're going to fill it with a halftone. First, copy the whole design, lock and hide the layer. Then, paste another layer underneath, selecting paste in front or to back. This way we'll paste it in the same place and we don't need to fit it in later. Now remove all the borders, selecting the transparent colour you see on the swatch panel by default. In Object, go to Live Paint and select Create. Make the line layer visible, but keep it locked so we can see how the design is coming along. With the Live Paint Bucket tool, fill in with the black the areas you want to colour with a solid colour. In my case, the first thing I'll paint are the eyes. But I'll remove the outline of the pupil in the line layer so it looks a bit smaller. Go back to the fill and carry on filling the tassels of the hat. Also, fill in the bottom half of the letters to give it an old school look. When you're done, choose a different colour, but flat, to fill in the areas where we want the gradient to appear. Our design won't keep this colour, so don't worry about the colour that you choose. When you finish, select all the Live Paint area and go to Object, Live Paint, Expand. Ungroup a few times until all the areas of paint are separate. Select a black area of paint and go to Select, Same, Fill Colour. Group, and then we have all the areas that are filled with a solid colour together. To the rest of the gaps, we'll apply a gradient fill that goes from white to black, or any other colour in the grayscale. We'll also direct the gradient angle to however we want it. You can do this choosing the degrees or manually with the gradient tool. Simply choose the gap you want, click on one end, and drag to the other. When you have the gradients how you want them, select all the areas with a gradient and go to Effect, Stylize, Color Halftone. Inside the options for this effect, we need to choose the maximum size of the radius of the dots. And in the channels, choose 0 for all of them. Select OK. If you want to correct any of these options later, you can do in the Appearance panel, clicking on the effect you want to adjust to get the tab we had earlier. We can vary the gradient so it doesn't go from a full white to a full black. To do this, select the swatch with the gradient fill you want to change and adjust the colours of the gradient, choosing greys instead of white or black. Bear in mind that if you add a background that isn't white, the areas with halftones won't be transparent. They'll be white. You can change this by selecting the whole design and setting the blending mode to multiply. As I said, silkscreen printing allows us to print in various colours. I'll show you how to prepare your files to print the photoliths. Create a document in CMYK mode and paste the design onto it. The text and the paths need to be converted into shapes. We'll do this by expanding the elements in Object, Expand. Next, in the Pathfinder, select Divide and ungroup the design. Then, separate the colours of the design into layers, one for each colour. Select a shape in the first colour and go to Select, Same, Fill Colour. Cut and paste in place, but on a different layer. Do this with all the parts you want to print in that same colour. And repeat for all the other colours. All the layers need to have a black fill to print the photoliths. Next, we'll print these off in layers. We need a different screen for each one of the photoliths, so these need to be prepared for the installation process. When the screens are ready, we need to adjust the stations of the press as each one will have a different colour. The order for screen printing is outside in. In our design, we'll first have to print the red and then the black. Up to now, we've seen that we can print flat colours and simple gradients using halftones. But screen printing can do much more, including printing photos. In the first place, we're going to learn how to print realistic photos using one colour. And the result is really cool. Open up the photo in Photoshop. Instead of just one, I'm using 2 photos to make a montage. The first thing we need to do is add some brightness. Go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness Contrast, and move the brightness slider to the right. You can leave the contrast as it is. If you have more than one photo, like me, then repeat this process. We'll do this so the design isn't too dark when we convert it to a grayscale. Now we'll delete the background. We don't want it to appear in the design. I'm just going to leave the girl with the board and the wave. With the Wand tool, select the background and delete it. Then use a soft eraser to polish it. Change the size as you go along to get rid of the smaller details. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it doesn't really have to be. For the wave, I can use the lasso tool to get rid of those parts that I don't want. When the photo is cropped and finished, go to Image, Mode, Grayscale, and this changes the photo into a black and white image. You don't need to merge the layers now, just select OK. Now go back to Image, Mode, Bitmap. Now we do have to merge the layers. To print, we need to select 300 pixels per inch, and in the next option, select Color Halftone, and OK. So the frequency is the amount of dots we want per line. For this design, 20 is fine. The angle is the angle the line of dots will have. So you don't get a weird effect, the best thing is to select an angle that isn't straight. So, one that isn't a multiple of 45. In Shape, select Circle. Although I know exactly what I want, feel free to try out the different options to see the various effects on your designs. So with the photolith ready, export this image, and all that's left is to take it to the printers or print it out on your home printer. As you know, something I like to do first is to try out the image on some mock-ups. So here's one for t-shirts. Generally, these mock-ups come organised into named layers and folders, so they're very easy to use. You can usually change the colour of the background and the t-shirt, but what we're looking for is a layer called Place Design Here or something similar. It's usually a smart object, and if you double-click on it, you'll open a new file where you can paste your design. As you can see, I've adjusted the curves of my montage to a blue tone. You can do this in Adjustments, Curves. Finally, save this file and go back to the mockup. Now you can move it and change it to wherever you want, giving you a better idea of how the design will look on the t-shirt. So now you know how to convert a photo for screen printing, we're going to learn how to print photos in various colours. The process is similar, only we need 4 screens to print on. Unlike a printer, one is for cyan, one for magenta, one for yellow, and the last, the key, for black. So we need to print off 4 photoliths, one for each colour. In this example, I'm going to show you how to do it with this picture of a dog. When you have it open in Photoshop, go to the channels, and you'll see there are 4 channels for each colour and a general one. Select any one of one colour, and in the options for the channels, select Divide Channels. You'll see that Photoshop has created various documents, although you can close one of them, the transparent one, without saving the changes. Now we have 4 files, one for each colour: black, yellow, magenta and cyan. The next step is to convert these files into bitmap, as we did earlier. So go to Image, Mode, Bitmap. As we're going to print it, select 300 ppi and make sure to select Color Halftone. In this new window, we're going to make some adjustments. First, I'll select a higher density of lines per inch, so there's more detail in the image and it's more realistic. Regarding the angle, to avoid the moire effect, each colour should have a different angle. So give the cyan 75 degrees, and in shape, select Circle. As you can see, the image from a distance doesn't look like it's made from just one colour, it looks like a grayscale. But if we zoom in, we can see the dots in detail. Repeat the previous process, but changing the angle of the different colours. So we'll give the magenta 15, we'll give the yellow 105, and finally the black 45. This last one has the undesired moire effect, but don't worry, because when we use the colours, you won't be able to notice. When we have all the files, save them in PNG format to print off the 4 photoliths. I'll show you how you can see what the image will look like with the 4 colours printed together. Open a copy of the files in PNG or JPEG that you saved for each colour. We'll go with the cyan first. With the image opened, zoom in as much as possible to select with the wand a white pixel. In Tolerance, select 0 and make sure the contiguous option isn't selected. Select it and delete the selection. Next, double-click on the layer to go into the options and go to Color Overlay, where we'll set the opacity to 100% and a normal blending mode. Double-click on the colour and put 100 in cyan and 0 for the rest of the colours. Repeat the process for the rest of the colours. The only variation is that in colour overlay, each one will have 100, but for the rest of the colours, 0. But for the black, we'll give 100% to all of the colours. I like to name the layers with whatever colour they are. The order of the layers makes a difference to the final result, so this is a good time to try out things and see what looks good. Remember, we just did this to see how it would look, but what we have to actually print out are the 4 files, one for each colour, with the black as dark as possible. As we mentioned, printing off photoliths, especially if you're going to do the printing yourself, is something you should never ignore. The photolith is our printed design on a transparent or semi-transparent paper. We can buy these papers in any stationery store or online and use them in our printer. The design should be black, as pure as possible, although we need to consider that there isn't a black capable of absorbing all the radiations, a true black. So actually, black tones are just very dark greys. To darken the colour of the vector designs as much as possible, open them in Illustrator and go to Preferences, Appearance of Black. it needs to be configured like this. On the screen, you need to show all the blacks as rich black. This means there won't be any confusion with the process black or the K. So we need to print and export all the black as rich black. This won't change the composition of the color black, but it will create a color that's completely black, known in HTML as 000,000 if exported to an RGB color space. And finally, I wanted to show you how to create color gradients in screen printing on the same photolith. As you can see in this video by the James Flames, it consists in making the mix on the screen. So the result is never the same as the previous print. And the result is a gradient like this poster here. I love the final result. I think it's a really special design. So I'll see you for our next and final lesson on the course.